news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. We've been talking all morning about Bob Woodson's passing and his life's work, his legacy, the individuals, and talking to some of the individuals who will and are carrying it on. We just spoke with Eli Steele, the documentarian. Text from 708. Eli Steele, I subscribe to a Substack. I do not pay for any other Substack but Eli. He is amazing. He is. We talked to Pastor Corey Brooks earlier in the program, a practitioner of Bob's principles to be in the business of transformation, not transaction, at the indigenous neighborhood level, if you want to improve the quality of life, enhance opportunity. Text from 203, U.S. flag should be at half staff for Robert Woodson. He, of all great Americans, deserves the tribute. He, like all great Americans, deserves tribute. I concur. But he wasn't political enough, I think, to generate the sort of attention that others do. I mean, he was very politically sophisticated in his thinking and his understanding, but he was a solutionist, not a partisan, which is also to his benefit and ours. Another angle, of course, is, speaking of opportunity, is with respect to the opportunity that's provided by education. And that's what we're going to discuss in pertinent part with our next guest. Jeff Bezos, not our next guest, but Jeff Bezos in his sit-down with Andrew Ross Sorkin, CNBC, and we've also been splicing into the conversations this morning. I had this to say about the New York City schools. If I ran Amazon, like the government runs the New York City government schools...
Good example. The New York City school system. Right. They spend $44,000 per student. $44,000. That's 30% more per student than other big cities like Chicago, right, LA, and Boston. And it's 3 times more than Miami and Houston. And by the way, New York City doesn't get better outcomes. So what this? Listen, let me just say, if we ran Amazon the way New York City runs their school system, right, your packages would take 6 weeks to arrive. We'd have to charge you a $100 delivery fee, and then when the package did finally arrive, it'd have the wrong item in it anyway. Right.
Yeah, in other words, Amazon wouldn't exist. It wouldn't have existed for very long. And so that, in part, is the discussion of the rich paying their fair share to support the schools and so forth.
And Elizabeth Warren has made this point repeatedly. I think she's made it in reference to you and others, are able to pay a lower tax rate, even though you're paying an enormous sum in taxes, a lower tax rate than maybe I am.
These people sometimes say that I don't pay taxes. That's not true. I pay billions of dollars in taxes. And it's a perfect, again, if people want me to pay more billions, right, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you. You can't connect those two things, not logically. There are more examples. Why is rent expensive? Why is rent so expensive? I recently saw somebody blamed it on Airbnb. Okay, Airbnb is not the cause of expensive rent. In fact, it's been almost, let me finish here 1 sec. It's already been outlawed in New York City, and rents are still very high. So we know Airbnb isn't causing high rents. What's really causing high rent is government intervention.
For more on this, please be joined by the aforementioned educator, Ian Rowe, founder of the Vertez Partnership Academy, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, visiting fellow at the Woodson Center, and author of the book Agency, the 4-point plan for all children to overcome the victimhood narrative and discover their pathway to power. Agency is the book, Ian Rowe. is the author. Ian, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
I'm always happy to speak with you, Dan, but sorry for the occasion that we're speaking.
Well, I mean,
but everything that you just described, by the way, is why Bob Woodson would say, all right, what are we going to do with this information? Are we going to just listen to it and whine about it? Or are we going to put in a plan in action? And in this case, he'd be advocating for school choice so that parents of low-income kids who only want the best for their children to have the ability to escape the situation that you just described in New York City.
Right. And you've been instrumental, not just in being a practitioner. Again, everybody associated Bob Woodson, they may be a theoretician in one respect, but there's always a practical aspect to it. There's the work, there's the doing, which is to being a solutionist, which is why he was such a seminal figure. But the curriculum too, which we have not talked about. The Woodson curriculum, which you have been so instrumental in developing, and speak to that. I mean, that's part of the legacy too, is that the stories that should be told, the education that should happen, is happening in more schools around the country thanks to the development of the Woodson curriculum.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I mean, what's interesting about my relationship with Bob is that I didn't meet Bob until 83. And I don't mean 1983, I mean age 83. When I met Bob, he had already been working for 6 decades, doing amazing things in low-income communities, and this idea of empowering the people closest to a problem to find the solutions, just as you said, the solutionist. And the context in which I met Bob was when the New York Times put out their completely discredited 1619 project that tried to reframe American history and say that America's founding principles were false when they were written, that America was founded as a slaveocracy, not a democracy. I mean, all this, just trash, But again, Bob said, okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to look at the New York Times, because they had just created a curriculum to try and push the 1619 Project curriculum into schools, and not just any schools. They were being pushed into some of the worst performing schools in the country, Chicago, Newark, schools where the reading proficiency rates were already in the teens. And so now you're going to be teaching a curriculum where the students will now learn, it's because America is a racist country and oppressive, and that's why we're not doing well in school. And so Bob's answer, as always, was, what's the action plan? What are we going to do? What's our counter argument? And I remember I met this, like, oh my God, you're right up my alley. How could I, never met you? And Bob said, well, then let's work together. You have experience in education. Let's put together a curriculum. Let's put together a curriculum that tells the whole story of the African-American experience in the United States. Let's not cherry pick in the negative, which is what the New York Times 1619 Project did. They chose the worst aspects of American history and weave this narrative of oppression. But what Bob also said was but let's not go to the other extreme, right? Let's not cherry pick only the best elements of American history, right? Let's not sanitize. And so we created the 1776 Unites group. We then created a curriculum, which has now been downloaded. It's in the hundreds of thousands, I think north of 300,000 downloads by teachers in all 50 states at all grade levels, that has lesson plans on incredible incredible Americans who happen to be Black, whose lives and stories capture the essence of the triumphs and tragedies of the African American experience in the United States. Some of the curriculum units, one of them is focused on the Rosenwald schools, which
Booker
many
T. and
people
Julius Rosenwald, right?
when Booker T. Washington, again, frustrated at the state of education for Black children through the American South, said, you know what, I'm not just going to sit with this problem, I'm going to do something about it. And he partnered with Julius Rosenwald, who at the time was the CEO of the Sears Roebuck Company, and together with local communities, built nearly 5,000 schools across the American South through 14 states and exclusively for Black children. And, the graduates include folks like Maya Angelou, John Lewis. I mean, incredible Americans. But most people don't know about this, but in the 1776 Unites curriculum is an amazing lesson plan around the Rosenwald schools. I'll just give you one more example. Oftentimes the Tulsa Massacre is taught in American schools as an example of America's historical and present-day oppression. And so we have put a lesson unit in the 1776 Unites curriculum. But what did we do? We told the whole story. So if you tell the story of the Tulsa Massacre, the first component of the lesson tells the story of during Jim Crow segregation, when racism was enshrined into law, Black Americans were able to access capital, raise money, be entrepreneurial, build businesses, the creation of Black Wall Street. All of that occurred during a time where laws were strictly prohibiting, equal access to lots of things for Black Americans, and yet Black Americans were able to create wealth and create Black Wall Street. So it's really important. That's the first segment on the Tulsa Massacre. If that was able to be achieved then, why can't we achieve that now? Then the second part of the lesson goes into the Tulsa Massacre and doesn't hide any of the horrific elements of what transpired. And then the third element of the unit is the rebuild of Black Wall Street. And I just think that's a great example of what Bob was trying to do. First he encountered a problem where there was this, discredited project from the New York Times 19 project. But we said, let's create the counter to that. But we didn't want to do the same thing that the New York Times did by creating a false impression of American history, but let's complete the whole story. And that's why I feel like Bob was just a special individual. He was faith-based, he was action-oriented, this idea of virtues and action. But in his response to so much criticism, he never, gave up on his principles. He never succumbed to doing the things that his critics were doing. We can do things the right way.
Yeah, right. The truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that the point, too, is, right, I mean, this is something that conservatives always have to guard, or solutionists always have to guard, which is that I could do what they're doing, but they couldn't do what I'm doing, and we should guard that difference jealously. So, for example,
100%.
I mean, when you talk about the approach to this 1776 Unites curriculum, I just remember, I mean, it's such a tell, right? And you need the contrast, I think, to drive it home to people. But there was a race day seminar at New Trier High School in the North Shore of Chicago, wealthy government school enclave. And the race day seminar, and it created a backlash among some residents of the North Shore who were courageous enough to be interested in the whole truth, because this was just going to be the victimology, identity politics version of race relations. And what they did smartly, like in the Woodson tradition, was say, not cancel the seminar day, just allow other perspectives, allow us to include the works of everyone from Booker T. Washington to Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams for perspectives on economics, for example. And rather than allow for an expanded discussion of a wide range of views among similarly situated and credentialed academics and thinkers and men and women of accomplishment. They just canceled the race day because we don't want you to hear the other side.
That is such the tell. That is so the tell. And that, again, that's one of the reasons Bob was so special. He was willing to talk to anyone. I remember when I first met him the first couple of years, he had a whole sit down with the head of the Black Lives Matter, like militant leader in New York, and they had a robust conversation where Bob was really able to counter the arguments in an evidence-based way, in a faith-based way. And I really think at the end of that conversation that BLM leader, even though he might never, disclose it publicly, had a shift in his opinion and was actually inspired by this idea that maybe the people that we're talking about, these so-called, impoverished, powerless people, Black people, might actually have a sense of agency themselves and might actually have the solutions to many of the issues that we face within the community. And that's all Bob was trying to say.
Yeah. And maybe if you present it the way Bob presents it, all of a sudden you have some light bulbs go on. You know what? Right. I don't like being infantilized by people who pretend to be speaking on my behalf. I can speak for myself.
Correct. The thing is, we never want to rob people of the dignity of being able to demonstrate that you can compete at the highest level. That's it. Bob would just always say, you do a disservice to people when you lower expectations, when you reduce standards, when you say, "Oh, you're not capable." That's a more pernicious kind of racism and discrimination, because you're taking away the very essence of what it means to be human, to be a full human being capitalizing on your full potential. That's why Bob was so inspiring, and that's why so many people who interacted with him, I think, even if they did come in with a sort of a more victimology type mindset, gravitated to his position, because he reminded us of what is possible within your own life.
I can't let you go without getting your comments, since you run charter schools in New York. Kathy Hochul opting into the Trump school tax credit program, as it were, a rather surprising and positively surprising development. I have to assume some of the credit goes to schools like yours that have proven up the model and have generated demand for more opportunities.
Yes. Well, sometimes, what is it? Hell freezes over, or whatever the phrases are that, and look, I wrote an op-ed, and multiple people, several of us, made what we think was a very strong case to Governor Hochul that this tax credit, even though it's got the name Trump associated with it, is a good thing for kids. Because at the end of the day, in New York State, just to give you a sense, the numbers are staggering. It's more than $1 billion that could be generated in privately funded scholarships for low-income kids that take no money away from New York State government resources. So it's a federal tax credit that provides an incentive for New Yorkers, to give $1,700 tax credit and transfer that to what's called a scholarship granting organization. And our school, Vertex Partnership Academies, we are very likely now to become a scholarship granting organization for public school kids, so that our kids will be able to access SAT prep, college visits, high impact tutoring. So I'm actually really happy that Governor Hochul moved in this direction. We actually talked about that. So one final story about Bob, because he was also an advocate for this credit, was that 3 weeks ago, we had what's called a fireside chat. Our school, for the 250th anniversary of America's founding, unlike the 1619 Project says, but for the 250th anniversary of America's founding, we've been having a series of incredible conversations with inspiring leaders where I speak to them one-on-one, and then we have dialogue with our students. So 3 weeks ago, we did a fireside chat with Bob. It may have been one of his last public appearances, but he shared so much grace and wisdom with our students. One line was, quote, "Never allow yourself to be defined by the challenges in your life. Take enough strength from those who love you to overcome those who do not," end quote. He also made this phrase, "Values are not taught, they are caught." And one of our students came up to me afterwards and said, "God, Mr. Rowe, that statement from Mr. Woodson really resonated, because I feel like, when you say they're taught, I'm sitting back and I'm kind of, absorbing them. But when you say values are caught, that puts me in the position where I'm grabbing those values. It's much more active. I'm exercising my agency. I'm looking at this kid and I'm like, yes, exactly. That's exactly like you are an active participant in your own life. No one's just going to hand you something. There are lots of people that love you and will support you, but at the end of the day, you've got to grab hold of your life. And that's what Bob was saying. And I am really inspired by the work that we did together with Bob, his tax credit, which hopefully, yes, our work contributed to that. But, all of this is an inspiration from Bob. I had the pleasure of meeting him 6 years ago, and God, we did some amazing things together. I mean, my life is forever changed and better for meeting Bob Woodson, and I hope to carry on his legacy, his faith in action, his virtues in action, all for the benefit of all kids to see a better future for themselves.
So good. So good. Ian Rowe, founder of Vertez Partnership Academy, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and visiting fellow at the Woodson Center. His book, Agency, the 4-point plan for all children to overcome the victimhood narrative and discover their pathway to power. Agency is the book. Ian Rowe is the author. Ian, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
And Ian joined us on the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. It's almost